This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Views on Vue. This week on our panel we have Fritz from the Vue core team.
Hi.
Divya Sasidharan, developer advocate at Netlify and Vue contributor.
Hello.
Joe Eames, organizer of the Framework Summit.
Hey everybody.
John Papa, web developer and open source contributor at Microsoft.
Good day, y'all.
All right, I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have two special guests. We have Mike Hartington.
Hello.
And Michael Tintiuc.
Hey everybody.
Do you gentlemen want to introduce yourselves since you haven't been on this show before?
Sure. So Mike Hartington, I am a developer at Ionic Framework, do a lot of DevRel, work on Angular bindings, work on a little project called Stencil, and just write a lot of JavaScript every day.
I work as a developer for Modus Create, which is a digital product agency. And we do a whole lot of client work, but as well, we have an open source initiative. And I guess what we're going to talk about today is something that came out recently out of that initiative.
Yeah, exciting. So Ionic, for those that are playing at home, we've talked a lot about Ionic on the Angular podcast because it's a project that I guess at least traditionally has been very Angular focused. So why would we be talking about this on a Vue podcast?
So historically, we've been very tied to Angular. And
Should we talk about what Ionic is first, for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah. So Ionic is an entire collection of components, animations, interactions for building mobile apps that can run in either natively on iOS or Android, or as a progressive web app deployed to whatever hosting provider you would like to use. Traditionally, we've been tied to Angular. I think way back in the day, we had some initial goals to support every modern framework at the time, which was Backbone, Ember, even some jQuery bindings. So we can see how far along we've come since those days. And we've been, all aboard the Angular train since Angular.js. And we recently made some discoverings that, hey, there's this thing called web components that allow you to do everything you have been doing in Angular just using standardized APIs. So we spent a year diving into this concept, onto these ideas of web components and integrating that with Angular. But now that the components themselves are framework agnostic, we've been looking at exploring other framework options. And with Michael and some of the folks from the Modus team, we've been looking at integrating Ionic with Vue.
Very cool. I've played with Ionic, and I have to say that it is a fairly nice and easy to pick up system for writing mobile apps. So I'm excited to see this come into Vue, especially, man, that sounded like a pun. Anyway, and it wasn't intentional. Anyway, but yeah, it's exciting to see it come this way, especially since most of the things I've been doing lately with any of the front-end frameworks have been with Vue. I've been pretty excited to be picking it up. And so, but I'm curious, what does that look like? Because Angular components and Vue components are not exactly the same.
Right. And that's okay that Angular components and Vue components are the same. The fact that we have taken a lot of time to abstract all of the low-level parts of Ionic as just vanilla web components allows you to write the same markup as you would, but you can pull in the framework of choice and then start to integrate into that particular ecosystem. So for Vue, you can use the Vue CLI, you can use Vuex, you can use the Vue router, and have that still feel like a typical Vue app. You just happen to be using Ionic's components for your UI, animations, and any kind of gestures or interactions that you would want to use. And the same thing for Angular.
So is it using something like Polymer under the hood, or?
No, so we built our own little tool for this called Stencil. Just takes an abstraction around web components runs it through a compiler, and outputs highly optimized web components at the end of the day.
Nice.
I actually didn't know that Stencil was created by the Ionic team.
Yeah, we do a few things here and there.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's cool.
There are so many hours in the day that, instead of doing just one project, we built a second one.
Yeah, as open source maintainers, like one problem we have is just too much free time.
Yeah, did you
too
know
much free time?
There are so many hours and so much free time. There's 24 hours in a day. You got to fill it with something.
Uh-huh. So what makes Ionic a little bit different from like other options like, native script, or, if people are, building a JavaScript application, things like React Native or in the Vue space, there's also like Weeks or Framework 7, I think is another like generally agnostic one. Like what makes Ionic different?
So from Ionic's perspective, it'd be closer into comparison to Framework 7 in that the components and everything that you generate or that are put into the DOM are all web-based. There is no complex native rendering setup. The components that you put into that application are the same DOM elements that get used in Android, for iOS, or even in the web. So you can literally have 100% code reuse without having to set up specific builds for iOS, specific builds for Android, or swap out templates. It just works.
Got it. So it's actual like CSS rather than like CSS that is then interpreted into something that will be natively rendered, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's full-blown CSS. So if you want to add in some complex CSS animations, go for it. It'll run. It's just whatever the browser can actually support. So it's all fun.
What are the advantages or disadvantages of that approach? We can take the advantages first.
Advantages, it's just easier to reason about, easier to maintain. And from an onboarding perspective, you don't have to teach 3 different kind of approaches to building out an app. Like if you're using some of these compiled to native approaches where you might be using Vue, you might be using another framework, and it has to generate these native layers, you have to have some kind of specific knowledge on that native layer to be able to bug issues, runtime performance. Using a web-only approach, you're bringing in those development skills that you've learned and how to debug, in the browser. You're not having to learn the native tools and quirks about it. If we were to think of disadvantages, if you are making the next Skyrim or the next Photoshop,
the next Skyrim on mobile.
Yeah. Unless you're using something like WebAssembly.
You totally just outed Joe's next project.
If you're doing something that's super heavy graphics and very 3D, very much into 3D, maybe web and web APIs aren't the best option unless you're doing something like WASM. That's a whole another topic that we don't have to get into.
Yeah, but you still have access to like WebAssembly and Canvas and things like that to do like some maybe less intense stuff than the next Skyrim?
Yeah, if you want to do like your own kind of like 2D platformer, you can incorporate that as well.
Okay, and do you still have access to native APIs? Like, can you still like tie into the gyroscope in your app and do things like that?
So right now there's 2 different approaches with this. If you were to use, say, the traditional approach, which would be Cordova, that's one approach that we've used in the past and one that, a lot of people still use. One that I think Michael has been playing around with is this new tool that we're working on called Capacitor, which it's the same kind of idea as Cordova or PhoneGap, just takes our approach on it. We've just taken some different ideas and different cues from modern native development and allow you to integrate all of that as well. So it would have an iOS version of the iOS runtime version, an Android runtime version, and then a web runtime version. But all you would really do is just call that one API, and it would know how to split out those different or handle those different calls depending on the platform.
Really good, I gotta say.
Okay. So what kind of apps have people built with Ionic? Like, is there anything that people would know?
Yes. Has anyone heard of the app Untapped? No.
Untapped.
I
don't drink beer, so it probably has to do with beer.
Has anyone heard of the fitness app, SWORKIT?
Yes.
I'm totally unfit.
SWORKIT is an Ionic app for those
You
who
say
do
it's called SWORKIT?
SWORKIT.
SWORKIT.
Yeah.
By the way, those kind of don't go with each other. One is for people who drink a lot of beer, and the other one's for people who do a lot of fitness. So unless you're doing
you can do
fitness
both
while drinking beer.
Yeah, after all the beer, you need to get fit.
You got to work off the IPAs somehow.
There you go.
Imbibe some calories, and then you get on the treadmill and nearly kill yourself, and you put it on YouTube. Profit.
There we go. Viral fame. Yeah, SWORKIT is a big one. Circuit workout app. Untapped is basically their pitch is like Facebook, but for beer. There's some more like official ones. MarketWatch is a Ionic app. There's a few of them out there, and we have a whole showcase page that you can check from.
We should talk about that one. I use that one a lot, and in fact, I got some feedback on it.
Oh yeah. But there's a few apps out there that use Ionic for everything.
You know, Mike, I've got a question for you. I may be thinking about this differently than you are, but I've done a lot of work with Ionic in the past, and one of the things I found a sweet spot for it, and I'm curious if I'm off base here, is business apps. So a lot of the stuff I do with Ionic is stuff I could never share with anybody because there are things that are behind enterprise walls that customers can use, but maybe aren't necessarily public apps that you download, like a SWORKIT would be, or Untapped, for example. Whereas the public apps that I've worked on, we tended to go native a lot of times because there were things that were just, we needed too much fine-tuned control over to feel that Ionic was a good fit. Is that still the case, or how do you feel?
I mean, that's still something that we see a lot of enterprises doing, where their entire apps that are built with Ionic are internal only. And these are apps that need to be built quickly, need to be built and maintained by maybe 1-2 people. So they need to have that ability to make a quick app, maintain it easily, and not have to have all these native developers. The fact that people are still doing make native apps, that's not a bad thing. Just proves that there is a fit for each product.
Yeah, I found that the place that we use it, the reason we chose Ionic in this project is we had to get this app out in less than 6 weeks. It was a complete rewrite, had to work on all major mobile devices, and the team knew JavaScript.
Right.
So going from there, they'd never used Ionic before other than me. So going from there, it was 6 weeks on a run from hell, quite frankly, to try to get the business requirements to get things out the door. But the best praise I could have for the product was that afterwards, nothing broke. So, which is a lot of praise in a large company when you got deadlines.
Well, I will take that as good praise.
It is. It was a good product for it. I've never used it with Vue though, so that's why I'm really interested in hearing more about how it's used with Vue, because I use it with Angular.
Right. I mean, the Vue work that we've been doing, I had done some early experiments around March and did a quick presentation, VueConf in New Orleans, basically going over like, hey, here's how we can take the core component set and integrate it with a Vue app, and what are all the like quirks, what are some of the things you need to worry about. And recently, we've been working with Michael and his team on getting things like routing, navigation, all these complex animations working inside of an app. And they've been testing it out on their own open source project and their own app, which I'll let him talk about that part if he wants.
All right. So it was quite a funny story. So this, I believe it must be one of the few first apps with Ionic forced since it's still in beta and with Vue. So it all started out as a passionate project for the open source initiative, as I said, we have at Modus. And we just decided to build something new, and we decided to use the new tech, like the Ionic 4 beta version and the emerging Vue.js. So at that time, I've never worked with Ionic. I've never actually even saw any Ionic code. And if I did, I wouldn't know it. And Vue.js, I think I wrote about 2.5 components for a client, and I had no idea. But it sounded really cool, and we decided to not do a to-do app because everybody hates those. And at the time, I wrote a small CLI program that fetches the Have I Been Pwned API, basically checks your passwords and emails. And we decided to make an app out of that, and to meet both the client needs and the passion, because some of the clients are interested in the emerging and new tech as well. So I went online and I saw a couple of tutorials, and I thought they were screw because somebody already figured it out. And apparently not. It was, I mean, you guys, Mike at Ionic, they did such an amazing job that 90% of the stuff works out of the box. You just plug that in, the components, they will just work because you insert the JavaScript, everything is done for you. But the problem was that it was, the routing was sketchy, and you wouldn't update the URL, for example. So that had to be delegated to the framework. So that's what we did. I started the work. I got the app to, by the way, the app is called Beep. I'm not at power to disclose what it means. I'm just kidding. But yeah, basically, I got it to the state where everything works except the routing, etc. But I spent the other 2 weeks just staring at the screen and going through the source code of Ionic and Vue.js, how everything worked, since I had no experience with that. And then it clicked, and the solution to go to, like TLDR, the solution is to extend the Vue's official router, plug the stuff that you guys with Ionic did, and you're done. So the coolest thing is that you just do npm install the Ionic Vue package that comes from Ionic, and you just call a couple of APIs and you're done. You have the access to the controllers. The rest of the web components are handled without even a single line of code. And what you get is Vue.js default routing. You have Ionic's out-of-the-box animations. The back button works everywhere, actually, so which took me, I think, the longest to fix. And even in our app, we have a dancing bee, which is handled by Airbnb's framework. Yeah, it's amazing. And to your question, John, like why would someone use Ionic or build a hybrid application instead of doing native? Like exactly, it takes so little time that I don't think I will ever use something else other than Vue and Ionic for my apps, because it's like you spend a week, you're done, and in a week of time for developing native applications, you'll get, I don't know, one step done or something like that.
Wow, that's a really impressive turnaround time, especially considering that you started like not really being familiar with Vue very much, or with Ionic.
Exactly.
I think it just kind of goes to show like the code that's in Vue and in the Vue source code is very approachable to, anyone. Like if you know a little bit of JavaScript, you can traverse the entire Vue code base and get a pretty decent understanding of what's going on without having to spend a whole lot of time just investing like, okay, what's going on here? How does this work? It's like, all right, it's pretty clean. Especially like the Vue router.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily that good. I mean, the Vue router maybe. The Vue router is a little bit simpler, but Vue core, there are some parts of that are a little bit hairy, and even people on the core team sometimes
we don't talk about those parts. Those are the shadowy parts. We avoid those.
Well, there are some parts that just get like really low level into like the virtual DOM that we don't need to touch very often, and so we're not as familiar with those parts.
Yeah, but at the same time, as from our perspective, like we're component authors, we don't necessarily need to know all the intricacies of virtual DOM and how things get rendered out. We just need to know, here's a component, I want to pass it some props, and here are some methods that it needs to know about.
Oh yeah, totally. Like reading application code. Yeah, I just didn't want people with a little bit of JavaScript knowledge to read the Vue source code and think like, wow, I must be really dumb, because there's a lot of this I'm not understanding.
Yeah, that's what I thought for those 2 weeks, because I was looking at TypeScript.
Got it.
So how do you pull the Vue bindings into Ionic then? Because when I've built Ionic apps in the past, I think you just npm install it and then you just have a command line tool. So how do you get the Vue stuff in there instead of doing it the Angular way?
So unofficially, you'd install the Ionic Vue package, and then Vue.use and include the Ionic package, the Ionic module, and it would have everything all set up from there. Officially, we'll be working on an extension to RCLI, which would allow you to create a Vue project. And once that all that would do is just generate essentially a predefined Vue CLI project. So it would use all the 3.0 CLI project settings, build tools. So you'd essentially be just getting a Vue project without having to call Vue create.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious for Michael, what was the hardest part of integrating Vue with Ionic and getting everything to work, including Vue and Vue Router and maybe Vuex? Like, was it that back button that you mentioned?
Well, it was the router, so the back button was part of the router. The problem is that I started writing my own router, and I was considering using Ionic's nav controller, but it was too much for me to write because I just felt that it's going to take ages for me, and I was thinking it just doesn't make sense to write something that has an official Vue.js implementation, right? So it took the longest to kind of come to the idea of extending Vue's router. And the fact that that was the perfect solution, write less code, just make sure that you don't break anything, you don't hook into what you're not supposed to hook in. And it just worked out of the box. But it took, as I said, 2 weeks to come to this conclusion. And yeah, just working out some of the bugs. But it was really related to how events in Vue were handled and how they were emitted from Ionic. So for example, the back button problem was that it would not propagate to the proper place. So you would have to catch it explicitly. So that was the fix for that. But it was working for Angular for some reason. So there are a couple of quirks that the devs that would use this package would never actually know about. It would just work. For example, you don't even have to import any SVGs for the icons, etc. You just put in the Ionic component and everything is pulled in for you with Webpack automatically. And yeah, actually, the coolest thing is that this package allows you to lazy load components in your router, same as the Vue router. As well, you can pass lazy loaded components through the Ionic API. So you can lazy load a modal, an alert, or whatever you want.
Okay, and because Ionic is rendering a web view, like you don't need to worry about like a custom history API implementation or anything like that?
No, it's you can use Vue router as if you didn't install a different package. It's literally extending it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
As I say, yeah, it's all using either the push API for the browser history, or if you're using hash API. So it's got the standard APIs that you're used to inside of a browser. It's because it's using because it's all web technology under the hood and just doesn't have any Chrome browser UI.
Yeah, so people just don't see the URL.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the whole point. Since this is going to be used by Vue.js developers, they are familiar with Vue Router and Vuex, right? We don't have to teach them something new. We can teach them to pass some additional options to it, for example, but don't make them relearn the whole thing from scratch. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always been interested in Ionic development is when you do have to sprinkle in a little bit of native stuff. For example, you want to talk to local storage, local databases, just to store a little concrete stuff up front. We'll just use that as an example. Getting that to work wasn't too bad because there's services you can inject that I found when I did the Angular way of getting there. But the trick I found was testing that. Finding a way to say, okay, I know if I run my app, I can run through a series like end-to-end tests to make sure this actually saves data, comes back. But when you're testing native features in general, do you have any tips on how to do that with Ionic?
A lot of manual work, unfortunately. This is an area that I don't even think native platforms have a definitive answer, or at least one that I know of. But it's a lot of setup work to make sure that if you can unit test functions, you can unit test your whole class, but actually having that end-to-end test set up so that way you can, all right, I want to launch an app on iPhone. I want to set all these key values inside of my storage. Can I make sure that that's working correctly? You can mock it, and that's kind of not always the right way or gives you the right answers, but a lot of manual testing, unfortunately. And iOS gives you all the iOS emulators that you would need, but just stock up on devices. If there are some cloud-based platforms that you can use, but I haven't integrated with them or checked them out to know what to know of an easier way other than just manual testing.
Well, it's good to know I'm not alone in that struggle. And to be clear, it wasn't an Ionic issue. It was the fact that you can't access some of these things in an environment unless you actually have a device
Right.
during an automated test. So I think some of the cloud services do this stuff better these days. But
yeah, my last experience with it was a couple years ago, and it was painful to get it to set up, and it didn't work half the time. So I just kind of rage quit and I'm just going to use a real device. What do I need clouds for?
Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers, or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today.
can you talk a little bit about the experience of pulling in some native features into an app? Let's say you're building an app and you only need a couple native things.
Mm-hmm.
How does one do that in Vue?
So in Vue, it would typically be the same experience. If you're using either something like Capacitor or Cordova, with Cordova, it'd just be referencing something off of the global window. With Capacitor, you'd be importing an API and it would know how to, if you're on web, use this web runtime. If you're on Android, use this one. And iOS, the same thing. So it'd automatically be able to handle proxying out those calls. But if you needed something custom, we have plenty of documentation on how to actually go out and build your own custom plugin. So if you need to integrate with new APIs that iOS or Android are shipping with, you just need to be able to write that native code and then send a method call from the web to this bridge.
Yeah, and I can actually speak to that with that Beep app. We're hooked into a couple of native APIs like the splash screen, the toolbar. So we're actually, if your password is hacked, we are changing the toolbar color to red, and when it's not compromised, it's green. So a lot of this stuff is really, really easy. You just, as Mike said, you just pull in that API and you just call a method that returns a promise, and you're done. That's what I like to do, like being both a developer and a library author. In this case, I had a lot of fun, and I didn't pull out that much hair, as you can see.
Yeah, you've got more than me. The people who are listening can't see, but imagine Slash from Guns N' Roses. No, it's more like Axl.
Yeah,
Slash is puffier.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm wondering about, a lot of people, they get this idea that, it's all JavaScript, so I can just share my code across all the code bases. Is that really the case here? I mean, how much of my Vue code from my website can I put into an Ionic app?
Basically all of it. I mean, there are some cases where you're going to want to either maybe refactor or change some of the UI to fit this mobile landscape. But as we start going from that mobile first approach, where if it looks great on mobile, we have that nice responsive UI, you can start to adopt that as the main app and swap out some of the traditional desktop designs for something like material design layouts that are being used all over today.
Yeah, you said earlier 100% code reuse, but if I actually want it to look like a mobile app, like I can't just drop in like the same divs and stuff like that, and with my styles that I'm using on my desktop, and then have it magically look like a mobile app, right?
Yeah, that's where you are wrong. So one of the things that Ionic does really well is this thing called platform continuity. So we have painstakingly went through the process of, if you are on iOS, you should get an iOS-looking app. And it will follow the iOS design guidelines like to a T. On Android, you'll get material design. And as you go to, say, like a progressive web app or something like a traditional desktop app, you'll still get those material design look and feels. But then you can start integrating our own grid component, which can resize and adjust the layout based on screen width. So you can have things like that split pane kind of, here's a little menu on one side and then the main content in the center. You can create that kind of layout rather easily by just wrapping some components around things.
Wait, but then it's different code, right? If I start adding new code?
No, it's the same thing.
So you're saying I could take a like nav bar and I'll drop that in and it'll just like automatically have like a nice like back button and stuff like that. And like my links will be, I don't know. I don't even know like how that would be translated.
So you would want to do some, like I said, refactoring just to figure out how is this going to look on mobile and then how does this translate well on desktop. So you can get it to work. But I mean, so you can add code like just for mobile that won't interfere with the desktop stuff so that that code can still run on the desktop version and it won't break anything, but it'll still work fine on mobile. Okay. So it's not that I can just take my desktop code and then just like plop it into like copy and paste it into an Ionic project and then I'm done. No. You would still want to update the code that you have to use the Ionic specific components.
Got it.
Like I'll post this in the chat. Like this is this is obviously an Angular version of the app. I haven't finished the Vue version yet. Sorry. But the UI still has that same behavior where as you start loading up the app, you have this, what looks like a good desktop experience. But as you start, adjusting to the different platforms, whether or not you are on Android or on iOS, you have something that feels more at home for mobile.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the process essentially then is import your web app and then go in and start moving things around to make it more Ionicized so that you get that nice mobile expected experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, add those custom Ionic components.
Yeah.
Depending on what Mike said about platform continuity, the craziest thing is that I was debugging iOS transitions in my browser. I just went into mobile mode, I changed the device to an Apple, and boom. You don't even have to load an emulator or fiddle with Xcode on Linux because that's practically impossible. So, yeah, that was the cherry on top for me.
And I just want to reiterate, so like building a Vue app, we can use the Ionic Vue project to basically like reuse that work that you did, Michael, to like get like the back button working and everything like that, and to work out those.
That's the whole point of the developers who are going to build something, like to not even think about all of those things. You just import that and you start developing your logic, not fiddle around with bugs.
So that's the best place to start if we want to start a new Ionic project with Vue specifically.
Oh, that reference app?
No, I'm talking about Ionic Vue.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be like the core library API that allows you to hook into for example, the Ionic controllers, etc. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually, as we get further along, the plan is for the CLI tooling on our end to create a full-fledged Vue project. But if someone already has like a Vue project and they want to install it, they just install Ionic Vue, and they would have and it'd just be integrating like it's a typical Vue package.
Yeah, all you have to do is Vue use the router and the API, and you're done. That's about
nice.
All you have to do.
So beyond just like if you want to do like hardcore like 3D Skyrim games and stuff like that, like are there any other reasons that like I wouldn't want to build something in Ionic? Like are there any other downsides or specific kinds of apps where that might be a little bit more difficult in Ionic, if not impossible?
I wouldn't think that there are different kinds of apps that you wouldn't want to use web technologies. I think a more important question that you would want to ask first is what's your team's experience? I wouldn't go to a bunch of C# devs and force them to learn JavaScript and it's like, here you go, have fun. Or I wouldn't go to like a team of people who are, diehard iOS devs and Objective-C folks. Like, It's just you have to figure out, okay, I have a team of people who know JavaScript. They're not really familiar with native technologies, so let's just go down this route, and they'll be able to reuse all those skills. If you're C#, there's obviously better choices than web technologies. You have things like Xamarin. It's built for people who know C#.
But what about for, like, I think a lot of people who are listening to this will be JavaScript developers,
right?
And they're probably using Vue in their day-to-day work. So I'm wondering if there's anything like that is technically impossible or technically difficult because of the way that Ionic works, like being in a web view. Like, are people going to feel, in some cases, the fact that they're in a web view, like, rather than doing something native? Like, are there cases where, you can't perfectly emulate the native UI? Sometimes it's a little bit jittery or something like that. It's not as smooth.
If there are, I haven't seen it. And some of the apps that are in the App Store using Ionic, SWORKIT, for example, has had over 12 million downloads. I don't think 12 million people would uninstall it or not use the app if they thought, oh, it's not 100% perfect. I think this is one of those points where developers will kind of nitpick a little to say, oh, it's not pixel perfect for this one situation. But most people don't typically care. They just know that.
What kind of issues do people open? Like, when people report an issue, I know I'm asking the hard questions, but like, what do people complain the most about?
API signatures, CSS not being a couple pixels off here and there. Typically, most of the issues are things that we've introduced ourselves somehow, and we just have to go back and fix it. That we're seeing less issues on, oh, this is something that I can do in iOS and Android, but I can't do it in Ionic. Can you please support it? Most of the people are looking at functionality issues like, this API that you said works doesn't work. Fix it, and which we promptly go and fix it. But we're not typically seeing, hey, how can I do this in Ionic?
Okay. And there aren't any, so there's no part of a UI that you might see in any kind of native app, whether it's on, Windows or iOS or Android, that you're not able to emulate.
It's all just really well done HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Okay.
Even things like the iOS like filter or blur as you start scrolling, that's possible to do with just a CSS rule.
If there's another library of components that people really like for hybrid mobile apps, like let's say like Onsen UI is one that is pretty popular. Are people able to drop that into an Ionic app in place of what Ionic provides?
Depending on what they're trying to do. I haven't personally tried it myself, but because it's just web technology at the end of the day, there really shouldn't be much integration issues.
Okay. And then I have another question that is maybe in the hard category. So how big, I know this is a hard question to answer, but how big are Ionic apps compared to like a lot of like more native apps? Like if you're building something, using C# or you're building something using, writing in Java or in Swift or something like that, are the apps going to be a lot bigger using Ionic? Like, are those going to be huge downloads for users? Because I've seen some reports that like large download size, sometimes people just bail and decide like never to use it, or by the time it downloads, they forget about it and then they never open it.
So it's an interesting point because I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to load storage settings on my phone to test certain apps. But I think the last time I checked, it was something like Twitter native was a couple hundred megabytes. But some of the actual apps that you're using on your phone that are built with Ionic can typically land in, with the native APIs that are already included, in that 50 megabyte category. So they can be either very small. I've gotten some down to 20 megabytes for full native builds of apps, which using a couple plugins, to just the web portion of the code being, when all said and done, lazy loaded, 500 kilobytes, 600 kilobytes. So the web portion itself isn't going to be the big footprint. It's just all the native code that you are going to include.
So since, like, if you decide to have some of the code lazy loaded, does that also mean that, like, in some cases, or at least if you want like the best download size or maybe performance, I don't know what the other considerations are, users might actually have to be connected to the internet just to open the app?
No, so at least from the native perspective, you'd bundle all of your code inside the native binary. So if you were to have, say, chunk 1, 2, and 3, that would be included on the phone, and you would just be lazy loading that from the file system.
Got it, not from an external server on the internet.
Right. You could if you wanted to. It's just not necessarily the main path that we ask people to go down. But
I think that makes sense. Like you would run into that limitation where if you have a spotty connection, this supposedly native app doesn't open.
Right. It's like, why would you want to include like some kind of restriction on your app?
Yeah. I think people expect those to be offline first.
Right.
I've got some good news for you guys. I just had a look at the total size of the reference app, 14.5 megabytes on the phone. That is with the native code that is using Vue, Ionic, and Capacitor. And we are hooking into quite a few native APIs like the network, the splash screen, as I said, the title bar, etc.
That sounds great.
And that is actually, for some reason, smaller than what I have the dist folder. The dist folder is 17 megabytes, so there is some magic going on.
Well, I wonder if iOS does some kind of optimization.
I'm on Android.
Yeah, Android does the same thing, though, where they'll thin out certain APIs based on what device version you're using. But I mean, another comparison is my airline app the app I use for my local home goods store is 80 megabytes. And it's not really doing a whole lot that I would think it needs all these native functionalities. It's just picking up getting a JSON response and rendering native UI. You could build the same thing inside using Ionic, Vue, Capacitor, Cordova, and get a fraction of the size.
So one thing that I'm wondering about here too is that let's talk data for a minute. So if I'm pulling data up and I want to like cache the data or things like that, I don't know. You can get kind of large that way. Or if I'm downloading files or something through the app. So how do you manage memory and things like that when you're in a web view, or is that all just handled by iOS and essentially Safari?
Typically, that's handled by the browser runtime. So iOS does a really good job of caching data responses, sometimes too good of a job when you're debugging an API. But if you are doing like production cases, your API can be cached based on the browser runtime. And then if you want to take it a step further and actually cache the response to your file system, we have storage classes that you can use to save that to either local storage, IndexedDB, or SQL storage if that's something you want to do, and just have that permanently saved to the device.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Do you have access to like actual like SQLite and stuff like that and IndexedDB, or do you have to use IndexedDB, but it's like SQLite, or do you have to use in-browser storage?
So you can use whatever one you want. We have a couple of libraries that work with they're based around local forage, so you can integrate either using IndexedDB, local storage if IndexedDB isn't available, or if SQLite's available, it'll use SQLite, IndexedDB, then local storage. So it can chain together what API you're using or what storage mechanism to use, and all you really do is just call storage set, storage get.
SQLite isn't available in the browser, is it?
No, but it'll automatically know that, okay, I'm in the browser, SQLite isn't there, just skip it and go to IndexedDB.
Oh, so does that mean within Ionic you can't use SQLite?
No, within Ionic you can still use SQLite. There's a plugin available for it.
You just won't use local forage for that?
Right.
Okay.
No, local forage would still be used. It'd just be the adapter. So it would normalize the storage set and get calls.
So you need an adapter for local forage to tell it, by the way, you also can access SQLite.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I found to be the what I find to be the most difficult thing with the data side is all the guard logic you end up needing in the application itself. It's not really the APIs. The APIs work pretty well. It's more making sure that if you try to access something that isn't there, for example, try to hit IndexedDB when it's not in an environment that you want it in, you got to make sure that, because that stuff doesn't crash in a friendly way either, which isn't an Ionic thing. Again, it's more just the native integration with it.
Well, I just wanted to be a little bit clear on when we say Ionic 4. Well, really, Ionic 4 does not provide any way to access data. That's more of a UI framework, right? So we're talking about Capacitor in this sense, and how it can provide access to local storage. You can actually write your own proprietary files to the file system if you want to, instead of using the database.
Okay. And I like that. It sounds like Ionic, something that is different from a lot of other frameworks, is that instead of there being like a sort of like framework way to do everything that you can't escape from, it sounds like for a lot of the different pieces, you can plug in other parts that are sort of agnostic to Ionic.
Yeah, and that's kind of, we found this really good balance of doing the approach what we call batteries included, where you can be up and running and have something working right out of the box. But if for some reason you want to bring in a few components that aren't part of the Ionic toolkit, it'll automatically be there. If you want to bring in a bunch of things that are at the native layer, not included, go for it. Just write it, and it'll include it, and it'll be available in the project.
I really like that. That's actually the Vue approach too. So for people who really like the way that Vue's put together, where you have an official router, you have official state management, you have a lot of other official libraries that are provided, but you don't have to use any of them. Like you could pull in different solutions to different problems that you happen to be more familiar with or you really like.
I think that is definitely the way to go, and I really appreciate how the Ionic guys did that, because I tried to, when writing the router, I tried to go the same route. And, well, sorry about the pun, but
you never have to apologize for puns on a Vue podcast.
All right. I'll go crazy. So the idea was to, even though the Ionic transitions, the animation during the transition is really nice, but one of the designers that was working on the reference app was constantly nagging me, like, can we do a custom one when we go from page B to page C? It's like, dude, not now. But then it just snapped and it's like, hold on, with Vue, I can just pass a parameter and just do X and Y and disable that, so you can actually pass custom transitions, default Vue.js driven transitions, to substitute Ionic stuff. And you can actually mix and match both. So that is giving flexibility to the dev and the end user. That is the way to go.
So one thing that I'm wondering about is, and especially on the Vue side, because I've used Ionic with Angular, and the documentation has been really great. But let's say that I get stuck somewhere, especially on the Vue end of things. How's the documentation there, and how's the community around that part of things?
So it's still early right now. In fact, if you were to go to the code base at the moment, you wouldn't, the Ionic official code base, you wouldn't see anything. We're still working through the process on Modus side to get the code into the official Ionic package and get that set up. But the good thing about the way the components are structured is that once the core components are, once their APIs are set, it's essentially the same thing between Angular, Vue, or no JavaScript or no framework, and just using vanilla JavaScript. So once you have that API kind of figured out in your head, you don't have to transition between using, here's the Angular approach for it, here's the Vue approach for it, here's the no JavaScript approach for it. It's the same thing between all three of them.
Yeah, I think I just might blow your minds, guys, because you can read the docs, and I think there will be like half a page, and you don't have to read them again because there's literally zero stuff for you to learn on how Ionic was integrated in Vue. There's 7 controllers that we integrated. The rest is handled by the web components. So you would most, like for the 99% of the time, you would go to Ionic side and read the docs for the components. The rest is identical. That is the cool part as well, is that if you're coming from an Angular project and you know a bunch of Ionic stuff, version 3, which changed in version 4, but you still have some of that information for you. You can reuse a lot of that knowledge.
So if someone decided that they wanted to like build an app right now using Ionic and Vue, and let's assume that they have some familiarity with Vue, they built some Vue apps, what would you recommend as their first step?
Their first step, if they want to go through and use it with Ionic and Vue, would be to check out the docs and check out the component overviews to get a feel of what the vanilla components are like. Because you can get pretty far with with no framework and just loading up HTML. When they want to get to the Vue integration and actually building something, I know Michael said it's boring, but to-do apps really do showcase some of the basic knowledge of how to actually get everything to integrate correctly. And I think it's a good starting point for most people to figure out.
So is there an example repo that we can drop in the show notes?
There would be the example repo would be the Beep app that Michael has right now. But we're going to be ramping out our docs for a full-fledged Vue section soon.
And Ionic.
Oh, so there'll be Vue-specific docs?
Yeah.
That's great.
And actually, you can go to Ionic Vue, and there's a cookbook directory. It has a whole bunch of example HTML files that you can just drop into your browser, and they just work.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And when you say you're going to have Vue docs soon, how soon is soon? Is it within the next few months or next few weeks, or?
Most likely within the next few months. We have some final touches that we want to make sure are done with the components themselves, and then we just start adding examples here and there inside of the component directory and filling all that out.
So by the time this podcast comes out, it may still be a month or two before they can see Vue-specific docs.
Maybe. But we're very active on Twitter, so we post all those links whenever they get published.
Okay, great. Let's see. Those are all the questions that I think I have.
What about testing? How do you test the Vue Ionic app?
Typically, it's the same exact way that you would test a Vue app. There's nothing specific needed for Ionic at that point.
At least for the unit test, you said, right?
Right. At least for the unit tests. And if you're doing integration tests, but you're just doing it in the browser, that would work the same way as you would with a typical Vue setup. The only quirks are around the native layer and how to do integration tests with that. So
for your sort of mid-level integration tests, you'd have to mock all of those native APIs?
Yeah, you could mock all of them, just return some. If you, for example, like the camera, you could just return a random base64 string versus an actual photo.
Okay. Does Ionic or some similar project in the ecosystem offer a collection of mocks that can be used for native APIs?
There's one that exists now, but it's specific for Angular, unfortunately, at the moment. So why should mocking be specific to Angular? That has nothing to do with Angular. Because this is the only one that it's traditionally been the only framework that we've needed to support. So this is actually a good call to action for community members. If they want to start integrating some of the native APIs and native mocks, please reach out because I would love to have that happen. Great. So would that be in a new repo for Vue or just for like a generic one, or where would they contribute that? I want to drop something in the show notes.
Depends how good the code is.
If they want to contribute that, they could go to the Ionic team's main repository and open an issue and ping me, and then I will sort them out and get them going and help them. Okay. And on GitHub, you are at Mike Hartington, right? M Hartington. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Great. And Michael, how about you? How do people reach you?
That's at Michael Tintiuc, just my whole name slurred together. And that is
your whole name slurred together.
Yeah. And that's all around the web. I don't use a different handle. And if I do, I probably don't want you to find me.
Got it. I'm the same way.
It's the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, anything else people should know?
If anyone would like to try out Ionic Vue, ping us and we'll get you going.
Yeah, both
Actually,
of the-
go
both
ahead.
the repos are open. So the reference app is open and MIT licensed. Ionic Vue is as well open for everybody. I'd suggest the cookbook examples are a good starting point. I will teach you a lot. They're not in, well, they're written in Vue, but as an HTML page, so it uses Unpackaged. And we actually worked very, very hard with both Ionic and the devs of the reference app to get away from Unpackaged and to not make any additional requests when you use your app on your phone. That's actually what you guys were talking about just earlier. Yeah, that's a pretty good start. And if you want to see how an end product would look like, the Beep app, the reference one, is actually had been approved for the app stores, the Apple App Store and Google Play as well. So I believe it's the first app built with Ionic, Vue, and Capacitor that had been submitted and accepted. So I think that is a good point to have a look at how everything was structured and themed, what was changed, and etc.
And if people have questions while they're looking at examples and looking at the docs, especially while the Vue specific docs are still being worked on, is there anywhere where they should ask questions? Like, should they open an issue, or is there a forum, or maybe a chat or something like that?
So we don't have a forum, but for some of the issues, I think it's fine.
Yeah, if they want to open up an issue on their repos, if they want to ask a question on the Ionic forum, it's forum.ionicframework.com. We can get them some help over there.
And we sometimes like to ask, like, how can people support the project? You know, both Ionic or Ionic Vue or any of the other projects in the ecosystem. And I know for Ionic, there's a company behind it, right?
Yes.
So how does that work? How do you make money? Like, is the first app free and then?
No. So all the code and all the framework, open source part of it is completely free and MIT licensed. The paid portions are just additional services to help you out in your development experience. So if you want to build the iOS or Android portion, but you don't want to spend the 3 hours it takes to download, set up the Android and iOS SDK, we have a hosted platform that will handle all that for you and allow you to create your builds without having to install all the native stuff on your own machine. And then you can deploy live updates without having to resubmit to the store.
Great. Then what do you think, Chuck? Should we move on to picks?
Yeah, this is cool stuff, though. I'm excited. I have more stuff to play with now. Dang it.
Yeah,
like
I'm
we
really
said earlier, there's so much time in the day.
Yeah, it is too much. And I'm always looking for things to do with the extra free time I have.
I'm happy to outsource to you, Chris. More than happy.
Yeah, for those who might be coming from a culture where the sarcasm doesn't come across very well, open source developers do not have a lot of free time.
Yeah,
that was the first library I wrote, and I experienced that firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I had free time, Friends was on the air.
Friends,
all right.
One of those words like sleep. Anyway, Mike and Michael, thank you both for sharing with this. Chris already had you share how to find you online. So yeah, let's go get some picks. John, do you want to start us off with picks?
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Certainly. So I have my pick is a NPM library called .env. And pretty much everything I do uses a node server, and on the back end, often want to make sure things are 12-factor ready. And if you're not sure what 12-factor is, definitely check it out. We'll put a link here in the show notes. It's basically a way to make sure everything that you run is abstracted and can work in any environment, whether it's staging, test, or whatever. And the .env NPM package is great because it allows me to run my application and use in local environments. I can use like a .env file to set my environment variables without having to literally list all of them out in a command line. And then I can also disable that when I go to production, so it just runs them using regular environment variables. So it's a great application, and I highly recommend it. It's .env.
Divya, why don't you share some picks with us?
Sure. My first pick is a post by Sarah Suidan on her blog called Nested Links Without Nesting Links, which is a really cool look at how to build, or just a thought exercise, or just her interpretation of how to build nested links, which I think is very well explained, like most of her posts are. And then my second is I've been using an app that you're all probably familiar with called Headspace, which is like an app for daily meditation, or it's guided meditation. And I've been trying to be more consistent with that because I think there is a correlation between meditating regularly and having a calm disposition. And so that is my goal. And I would highly recommend that app.
I love that app as well. So
yeah,
it really helps.
Some people dislike it because they don't like his accent. I'm fine with it.
His accent is the most soothing thing I hear every day.
It's great. Yeah.
I haven't used Headspace, but I used to use Calm, and that's another good one. Now I usually don't use any app. I just use a timer, self-guided.
Leet meditator.
Awesome. Chris, what are your picks?
Okay, my first pick is a library called Cuid. That's C-U-I-D. It's on NPM, and it's for generating collision-resistant unique IDs, similar to like the library called UUID, but it's supposed to be much more collision-resistant on the client side. I use it in pretty much every single project for like generating unique keys when I need them. It's really, really great. And in all of the apps that I've used it in, I have never encountered a collision. So it works really, really well. And it also, like, unlike UUID and a lot of other libraries, it has tests to measure its collision resistance to make sure that it's suitable, like for use on the client side when you can't check a database to make sure that this ID hasn't already been taken. And my next pick is going to be another library called Mapbox.gl, which Divya has used before, and we might have talked about it a few times as well. Divya and I are both like huge mapping geeks. That's actually like the first thing that we geeked out about when we met each other. It's like, oh, yeah. Your slides have like a Mapbox.gl demo. My slides have a Mapbox.gl demo too. And then we had that awkward moment. It's like, well, one of us has got to change. It's like wearing the same shirt that isn't a Vue shirt. That was really fun, and it's really great for creating interactive maps. I love it so much, and it offers some nice integration in Vue. And Divya, I think are building a library that is like a Vue mapper. Is that public yet, or
not yet? It's just something that I'm trying to work through with data that I have access to. I'm still trying to work through what data we can make public and what we can't, because a lot of it is through Netlify, and because a lot of the sites that are hosted by Vue are on Netlify, and so I'm still working through those kinks of like what exactly you want to share. Yeah, coming soon to a screen near you.
Yeah, awesome. And my last pick is a Netflix show called The Originals. This is another one that I watch. I just started watching. Sometimes when I'm coding and I need a little bit of a break, but I want to keep working. And it is apparently a spinoff of The Vampire Diaries, which I have never seen, but I've heard that it's way better than The Vampire Diaries. So if you've read that and you think like, I don't want to watch like like a romance soap opera. Apparently, the originals is way better. And I will still say that it is not a good show. It is definitely a soap opera. And it's like super cheesy, but I love how cheesy it is. Like there are a lot of like British accents and, you know, people saying like, no, but we mustn't. And wonderful things like that. Like it's super campy and it's fun and very low energy because not a lot of complicated stuff happens. And if complicated stuff does happen, you don't really need to know about it. It's like, oh, this person is like trying to kill this other person now. Or maybe they're trying to kill them by saving them or save them by killing them. All sorts of stuff. Yeah. You don't really need to know what's going on. So that's a good one to have in the background sometimes. And those are all my picks for today.
Awesome. Joe, what are your picks?
So wait a second. Chris, did you ever watch like the Johnny Depp movie Dark Shadows, which was based on some daytime stuff about a vampire or something?
No, I'm not really into like vampire dramas usually, but once in a while I get into
vampire
like
soap operas is a pretty small genre.
I get into a show. And actually, like I take back what I said about the originals and it not being a good show because it is so good at being what it is. Like it nails exactly what it's trying to do. And that I totally respect. So like from a craft perspective, I really appreciate that they've done a really good job making the show that they're trying to make. And a lot of it does like surprisingly kind of hold together. Not always. There are exceptions, but I am surprised. Once in a while, I get into a show like this, like another one that I've really dug. When I was going a pretty deep depression, it helped me out and like was something that could make me smile when not a lot of things could, is Mako Mermaids and H2O Adventure, which is like a teen drama. It's not anime. It's live action. It's an Australian like drama, and it's so campy and silly, and it has the same kinds of just like weird, silly drama. Although that one's even less mature, and like that one is maybe even like kid friendly because there's not really like a lot of violence or anything. So those are both shows that are maybe not what would be considered good shows, but they're very, very good at doing what they're trying to be.
Learning a lot about you, Chris.
maybe more than you bargained for. I apologize for that.
Awesome. Okay, so for my picks, since we're talking about movies, I'm going to pick and not pick a movie and unpick a movie. The movie Burn After Reading, if you haven't seen it, is possibly the Coen brothers' best movie. Super amazing, super quirky movie. But if you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch. On the other hand, the movie Peppermint with, what's her name?
Is that with Anne Hathaway? Or?
No, not Anne Hathaway. It's the girl from Alias.
Oh.
The woman who acted in Alias. Jennifer Garner. There we go.
Jennifer Garner. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
I actually enjoyed it just because it was lots of action and a little over the top action, but it was a really poor, like, I feel like they put on a movie that I wrote the dialogue and story for. Right? It was definitely not going to win any awards for dialogue or story, but the action was pretty fun. Nonetheless, it wasn't great at what it was, to quote Chris, right?
Wasn't able to garner your praise.
Oh man!
Wow, more puns. It's a pun day apparently. Nice.
Let's make it stop.
Make it stop. And then my last pick is going to be a blog article that this guy wrote. What's funny is he doesn't write a lot of stuff. He's written like things he wrote one on Hacker Noon, and it's like he's got 150 followers, but the thing has gone crazy. Everybody's talking about it because it for what it is, it actually makes you sit and talk and debate the topic. The blog article is called Goodbye Redux. Have any of you guys read this? Any of you folks read this? Mike has. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So, yeah, whether you agree, kind of agree, vehemently disagree, or whatever, it is such a great read to see. He's got some really interesting perspectives. He talks about technology that might reduce, if not eliminate, the need for the Flux type pattern in our front end applications. And man, I've because of this article, I've been in a whole bunch of really fun conversations with friends about Redux as a whole and this pattern, Vuex, whatever. What they are, do we need them, what are the right ways, etc. And it's just been a great conversation piece. So you absolutely should go and read this blog article. It may be one of my picks for the year for just a really interesting, thought-provoking piece called Goodbye Redux. If you just Google, we'll have it in the show notes, of course, but if you just Google Goodbye Redux, it comes right up. Those are my picks.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. One is, and I don't know if they do this everywhere, but they're doing it here right now, is Friends of Scouting. So if you're looking for a good cause to give some money to, Friends of Scouting is basically a fundraiser for the Boy Scouts of America. And anyway, I'm currently a block captain for, part of my neighborhood, just to, get the word out and get people to donate. But yeah, it's a terrific organization. I fully support them. And yeah, so if you're looking for a good cause to give some money to, go find your local scout group and tell them that you want to participate in Friends of Scouting. And it really is just a donation drive. So participating just means giving them some money. I am also going to quickly, where was it? I had something else I was going to pick and I can't remember what it was. So I guess I'll just leave it there. Mike, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah. So first one would be that awesome blog post from the VS Code folks on the GitHub integration or GitHub pull request integration that came out. That's my only dev pick. It's super cool and just throws everything into the editor. Just keep everyone in VS Code and eventually it'll become full-blown Visual Studio. That and probably...
No!
That and Infinity War from the Avengers Infinity War movie. I rewatched that recently, and I'm still just blown away by how good of a movie it is. Not just like a good superhero movie, but like a really good movie in general. So I think it's on Netflix. So give it a watch because it's just I gush and nerd out every single time I watch it.
Nice. Michael, what are your picks?
I've heard some people say that Infinity War is an excellent movie or it's 45 different terrible movies.
I mean, it's okay to have opinions if those opinions could be wrong.
Awesome. Michael, what are your picks?
Yeah, my picks would be Airbnb's Lottie animation library. It just blew my mind when the designer submitted like an image for the hacked password page, right? And there's this bee that we have as an avatar for the app. And then when he had some free time, he decided to go into Adobe After Effects and make him dance and do whatever. And then he sent it to me and asked, like, dude, is it like going fully insane just to ask you if it's possible to put it in the application? And I said, yeah, that's impossible, dude. Forget about it. And then I couldn't sleep because I really wanted that animation. It was so smooth, so nice. And I researched and I came across this library from Airbnb, and it does miracles. You can literally install a plugin into Adobe After Effects and export a package that you can just import in Vue or wherever, and you can have an animation in your mobile app on your browser, and it's amazing. And I'll post that in a link to that as well. My second pick would be, I don't know if you heard, guys, but Steam had announced Steam Play, which actually allows you to play Windows games on Linux. So they basically extended Wine and added a whole bunch of cool features to it. So you can actually take your favorite, Skyrim, and play it on Linux with 99% of the same performance, I guess.
Nice.
Awesome.
So the reckoning has begun. Everything to Linux.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you both for coming.
Hey, thank you for having us. This has been great.
Thanks. It
All
was
right.
awesome. Thank you.
We'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and we will catch everyone next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.